Kicking through the center line during underwater kicking is not going to result in more resistance as swimmers move through the water. However, swimmers and coaches can confuse the two, resulting in slower underwater kicking. Let's clear up the confusion. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. I recently received a great question in our YouTube comment about kicking through the center line. The viewer was confused about kicking through the center line as they were concerned that too much resistance will be created, thereby slowing speed. They asked if the kick should stay within the profile of the body to keep resistance as low as possible and speed as high as possible. It's a great question because it illustrates an understanding of the trade-offs between propulsion and resistance. Initially, more amplitude results in more propulsion rather than more drag, but this quickly reverses and more drag is created and less propulsion, and that's going to lead to slower swimming. So to create as much speed as possible, swimmers need to create an optimal amount of undulation for them. Too much means too much resistance, too little means too little propulsion. Both result in less speed. So how does this relate to kicking through the center line? A key aspect of kicking through the center line is the feet need to move in front of the body. The important point here is for that to happen, the feet need to move more than the body. And it's actually the back and forth movement of the body over large ranges of motion that creates a lot of resistance, much more so than the feet moving through a large range of motion. So we can keep resistance relatively low, even with a relatively forward kick, if swimmers keep the movement of the body relatively tight. So if the hips are moving all over the place, that's going to cause a lot of resistance without creating a lot of propulsion. But if we can keep things a little bit tighter through the torso and let the feet move through a large range of motion, that is going to create speed. The forward kick is going to create propulsion, and the tighter body is going to limit the amount of resistance that's created. This is where many novice kickers make mistakes. They're unable to differentiate between range of motion at the feet and range of motion through the torso. They either move both a lot or they keep both pretty locked in. And neither is a great strategy. One means too much resistance, the other means too little propulsion. We have to help them learn to get the range of motion through the feet rather than the body. This is obviously pretty nuanced, and while we're having a discussion about what happens, it's probably not something that swimmers need to worry about from a cognitive perspective. In fact, I tend to avoid discussing it with them because they're much more likely to misinterpret the idea rather than execute it correctly. Instead, I try to put them in positions where they can feel these key concepts. They don't have to understand what's happening if they can be in positions where they can feel what's happening and how to execute on that. Any activity that lets them feel what it's like to kick through the center line while maintaining great posture and position is going to be a powerful strategy for success. Flipper kick is one way that I really like to help them understand and execute on this nuance. The upper body and the torso aren't moving around very much, but the legs are moving through a big range of motion. Swimmers can feel the difference between just using a lot of undulation and then really letting the legs and the feet snap through the kick. And the exercise lets them know if they're being successful just by watching how much bubbles they create. More bubbles and more consistent bubbles are what we're looking for, as that indicates the swimmers are doing a really good job of kicking through a full range of motion. Another effective strategy is vertical kicking backwards. Again, swimmers have to use a big range of motion through the legs while controlling the range of motion through the torso. By moving backwards, swimmers are going to have to kick through, but if the body is moving all over the place, they won't have the stability to execute a solid kick. And they can see if they're being effective based upon how much backwards progress they're making or not. Combining these two strategies with regular underwater kicking really helps them figure out the difference between using range of motion through the torso and the body and range of motion through the feet. It's definitely possible for swimmers to use too much range of motion during underwater kicking, as they'll be creating too much resistance and not enough propulsion. However, it's where those ranges of motion come from that ultimately determines how much propulsion and how much resistance is going to be created. When the body is moving in a relatively tight rhythm and the feet are kicking forward, swimmers are going to create a lot more propulsion and a lot less resistance. And that is exactly what we want. And to avoid confusing swimmers, I tend to not explain these concepts very much. Instead, I use activities that allow them to feel what they need to do to make it happen without having to think about it too much. There's a lot less opportunity for swimmers to mess up in spite of their best intentions. If you want to learn more about how to kick through the center line, check out the video here and check out the video here. Hope that was helpful, and as always, keep it simple.